Hello everyone, I hope you're having a wonderful day. So fair warning in advance, this video is going to be a lot longer. So I just kind of wanted to warn everyone. And then I tried, and I apologize, I'm sure none of you can read this, but I tried to draw this to kind of help me explain it along the way. So I'll try and find a way to post this as well. And hopefully this will kind of make everything I'm talking about a little bit easier for, visual people. But what this kind of has to do with specifically for this video is thoughts and how they occur and then what leads to further thoughts, right? This is something I've really been thinking about for a while now, with philosophy and also with like writing. I'm trying to understand why people think the way that they do. And of course, a lot of it has to do with experiences and biases and, so on and so forth. And I've been able to kind of label into 4 areas that I've noticed, personally, and that I've seen other people kind of notice. And so, of course, I love all you guys' ideas and thoughts as well, but I kind of want to go over what I've noticed, right? So the first one that I'm going to talk about, I've labeled it instinctive, and this is something that kind of occurs in the outside world, something outside of yourself, right? So something happens to me, let's say, I get pinched, right? My first thought, even if it's subconscious more so than, truly conscious thinking is, that hurt, that didn't feel super good, right? Another example of this is, let's say you get sunburned, right? You don't notice it at first when it happens. You wake up the next day, you're like, wow, my arm feels really uncomfortable. It's super hot. And you realize, oh, I got sunburned. This hurts. This sucks, right? So your first thought, you didn't plan to think that. You didn't wake up, you're like, I'm going to really, go over how much this hurts later, right? It just happens. It's something that occurs, you get cut off in traffic. Your first thought is, well, this guy's awful, right? It's something that just happens and occurs and something you're not thinking about or trying to control, right? The second type of thinking is creative, right? That's something that happens internally and you plan to do it. While it can happen on its own, like instinctive, it tends to happen with a goal in mind. I am going to write a book. Let me come up with ideas. So you're trying to be creative. You can pull inspiration from outside things, but you can also pull inspiration kind of from nowhere. Right? If I say I want to write a book, what sounds fun? Oh, I should write it about dinosaurs. I didn't see a dinosaur. I didn't see, a book about dinosaurs, right? That is something that had nothing to do with affecting myself, but I still came up with. And so I kind of call that creative thinking, right? And creative thinking is something that has to kind of be practiced. While some people are talented in it, think, Michelangelo, Picasso, Shakespeare, where they might have just been talented in it from a young age, but it's still something that has to be worked on to really get good at it. While instinctive, I don't think you have to work on it to the same degree, right? Some people, actually everyone I can think of has that thought of, wow, that kind of hurts, right? Or, oh, wow, this guy's kind of mean, or this guy's kind of nice, or, oh, they're pretty, right? None of these are, thoughts that we go out to the mall and we're like, as soon as we see someone who looks good, we're going to think that they're pretty. And we're, that's not, it's something that happens in the moment. It's something that affects you, right? From outside, a plan. Whereas creative thinking generally is planned. The third type of thinking that I've noticed is relational. Now, this never happens initially. Creative and instinctive are initial thoughts. It could be either one, right? Those are the 2 initial thoughts that I've noticed. Relational is always coming from those 2 initial thoughts. And that is relating what your first thought is to initial thoughts that are coming maybe from biases, that are coming maybe from, experience, that are coming from something else. So go back to my example of like, a sunburn, for example. Wow, this really hurts. I should go get aloe vera gel, right? Or, oh, in the future, I should make sure to put on sunscreen. I wonder how much sunscreen costs nowadays, right? These all thoughts were originally just, ow, this hurts. And those are relational, right? You can clearly link them back to each other, right? And you can do the same thing with creative, right? I'm going to write a book. I want it to be, about dinosaurs, something maybe similar to Jurassic Park. Well, I don't really want it to be, maybe about dinosaurs. Oh, I read this awesome book about, monsters. What if there's some kind of, dinosaur style monster, right? It's creative. You're kind of coming up with it on your own, but you're still pulling, your experience and what you've seen before in the past. And that's relational thinking, right? And I think that's where the majority of people are in, right? They have an initial thought and then they stay in this relational thinking, right? Whereas the creative thinking, I think, is a little bit harder for people to, like I said, it's something that takes a little bit more work, but it's also something that happens with, like assumptions, right? Like, oh, this person was late probably because they were messing around, and you know what I mean? That's a creative thought. It has nothing to do with, logic, right? It has to do with your assumptions based on, your, and also it's a little bit of creative. It's also relationship. You're taking your biases and your assumptions on this person, right? And they're late, and then you're creatively thinking about it from there, and it's kind of a mix, right? And a lot of these thoughts are mixed, right? Because I don't know about you, but I'm not planning out how I'm going to think, right? It's something that occurs. And so those are the three main ways, right, that your thoughts are, initially started, right? Is something happens, you think something, probably don't mean to, but you still think something. You mean to think something, right? And so you're actively thinking, and then you're relating stuff. The fourth, right, and kind of the final one, and kind of the one that everyone wants to get to in the majority of situations, is deep thinking, right? And this is something that definitely has to be trained. Most people don't start here, and if you're like truly just talented in this, right, you're just talented, right? And that's something to be proud of. But it's also, if you're not talented in it, something that can be learned. It just takes time. And this is, philosophers or people like Stephen Hawking, right, where it's like they are able to ask very, very difficult questions and then get the answers to them. And so very few people will ever, I can't think of anyone I've ever met or a situation where ever was immediately started in deep thinking. Typically something happened and then I got to the deep thinking. But if I just sit here and I say like, what is life, right? And I just start going from that's very unusual, and it's planned, right? It kind of goes back to the creative thinking of, I plan to ask myself a question to understand. So I started at creative, right? And then to really get to deep, it's not just asking yourself one question, right? Because asking yourself one question, especially one that you kind of know the answer to, I don't know the answer to like, what is life? But an example is, why is the grass green? Well, it's because they watered it, right? Now, why does the grass become green when it's watered? Well, because, it needs nutrients. And then you start thinking, deeper and deeper into why and how. And this is where deep thinking, starts to kind of come out and starts to become more than just relational and truly deep thinking. And so this can be different for everyone, right? Because some people know answers to questions that I don't know. And so for me, it might really be deep thinking. I'm really trying to understand something. But for them, it's like, oh, well, the answer to this physics question is ax b plus minus whatever, right? So for me, something that's deep thinking is not the same for you guys. Same with creative. Something that's super creative for me might not be super creative for you because, you already wrote this book or whatever. And same with relational, right? Something that I immediately connect to one thing, right? I think of, Greek gods. I immediately think of Percy Jackson just because I read those books. Whereas someone who never read Percy Jackson, if they think of Greek gods, they might just think of, I don't know, like the Pantheon, or maybe they immediately think of Roman gods, right? Because that's their understanding. They, their biases, their experiences, they think about things differently. Deep thinking is the same kind of, it's totally different for everyone. And when you get to deep thinking, right, most people will notice it because you'll start to really, sit back and ponder, right? Whereas relational thinking, creative thinking, and instinctive thinking, you're not really pondering anything. It's just thoughts, right? You're just sitting there thinking. And I think the biggest thing that kind of separates humans from a lot of other animals and stuff is this ability of deep thinking, right? Because the truth is, I believe all animals can think. I think the level at which they think is different. So I think, I'm not going to try and differentiate, like I don't know exactly bacteria or anything like that. So I'm not going to like try and be super, super like scientifically correct and try and, put everything everywhere. But long story short, I think almost all, if not all, creatures with some kind of brain can do the instinctual thinking, right? Something happens and so they think something, but the way they think is definitely going to be different than ours. I get sunburned, I'm like, ow, that kind of hurts. I wonder why this happened. A bug, something happens and their thought might just be like, run. Not in words, right? But they have an instinctual reaction, right? And their body does something based on what their mind thought, right? Whereas creative thinking, it's hard to know. Like I said, I don't know everything about animals, but to me, creative thinking is similar like a thunderstorm with a dog, right? They're assuming something's happened. They're jumping to conclusions we don't know, maybe they're imagining nothing, maybe they are instinctively just scared of the noise, right? But they could be assuming, right, and taking in from their experiences and all that kind of stuff, also relational as to, you know, why there is thunder or why it's dangerous, right? Same with how, I'm sorry, what am I thinking of? Like when you leave, you know, and your dog seems really sad and like you might not come back, but then you come home and they're super excited, where it's like they didn't prepare to think any of that, right? Almost, it's the majority of it is instinctual, right? Now the relational, I also think a lot of animals have that. For example, if you feed them a treat every time they do something, right, they are able to understand that, you know, feeding a treat equals they should do this. Or if they do this, they'll get a treat. And if they lick your hand after they get a treat, they'll, you know, get a neck rub or whatever, or you'll pet them, right? I don't know how much of that is instinctual, because the truth is I think they can, I have an understanding that they can think, right? Now the levels of it, definitely different than ours, right? As well as, you know, there are even monkeys using tools and everything like that. So they definitely go deeper than just instinct, right? Just something happens so they do something else. They can learn, they can experience, they can grab people's experiences and biases and then apply them. So that I can infer that they have some kind of creative and some kind of relational thinking. However, I think it stops there. I don't think, you know, dolphins, which, you know, are highly intelligent creatures, or like, you know, like certain types of chimpanzees and monkeys are pondering like, what is life, right? I don't think they've quite gotten there. I think they can, and I think that's where like evolution will eventually lead. If, you know, if everything remained as is, eventually a species will get there with enough time. But I think it, you know, that's what separates us from, you know, just savages, I guess I'll say, is our ability of deep thinking, of trying to think, is this right? Is this wrong? Why is this right? Why is this wrong? And that's where the deep thinking occurs. And I do think it's something trainable. You know, I think that, you know, anyone out there right now, if you can't currently, you don't have an instinct to try and understand why, and you're not, you know, curious, I think you can get there if that's your choice, right? But I don't think it's bad that you're not, right? If same with creative, if you're not creative, you have no interest in being creative, then you don't have to work on being creative, right? You don't have to work on that thought process, on that ability to form ideas, but you have the ability to, right? And you don't have to compare yourself to Picasso's or to, you know, Shakespeare's, because the way you'll do it will be a little different because you have different experiences. Your relational thoughts will be a little bit different, but that doesn't mean you can't make something that, you know, that's amazing. So that was very, very long. I didn't think it'd be quite this long. And then I kind of tried my best to draw it. This is us. This is my drawing. This is instinctive, creative, relational, and then deep, right? So instinctual kind of starts out the majority of it, unless the intent is to start at creative. This instinctive can lead to creative, can lead to relational, or can even lead to think. You know, something happens, you know, like a sunburn, you think, that hurt, you know, I wonder why that happened. And then you can start to think, you know, why is it that humans get sunburns? And you try and understand it. You will use this relational thought process as well, but you can go almost immediately too deep, right? Too deep. Same with creative, you know what I mean? From creative, you can go to relational, and from relational, you can go back to creative. I think there are very few times you go from relational and deep back to instinctive though, right? With intent, right? Oh, wow, this kind of hurts. You know, I kind of wonder why this hurts. You stub your toe, you know, ow, that hurt. You're not trying to put in that deep thinking from, you know, why sunburns exist into, wow, this really hurt. Again, that's an instinctive thought you didn't have any plans to go to, right? Creative's a little different. If you go from creative to relational, you can go from relational back to creative. You're trying to create something about dinosaurs, you understand stuff about dinosaurs, you go back to creating, you know, this now new book about, you know, evolved monsters, and then you pull in advice, right? Experiences and biases. And then same with deep. I think deep, I mean, you could get from creative to deep as well. So I guess there should be another line here. I can pull that in. Very, very sloppy of me. But yeah, so you can go from creative to deep, and you can go from relational to deep, and vice versa, right? Because when you're thinking deeply, especially about something like philosophy, that's what I personally kind of enjoy. when I'm thinking about, all these, questions, I'm pulling in ideas that, are creative. I'm pulling in ideas that are relational, right? And I'm sometimes going back to the relational thoughts, right? I'm going back to more creative thoughts and then back to what I consider deep thinking. And to the point where you're even utilizing a lot of these, you're actually utilizing all of these at the same time. You're capable of thinking all of these at the same time. This is me kind of separating all of them in the hopes that when you're thinking, you can kind of understand, is this an instinctive thought, right? Especially, with emotions and everything like that. You can get upset and it's like, is that an instinctive thought? Is that something that's just happening and I haven't thought about it, right? Like, is there a real good reason why I'm, upset? And then at the same time, you can train this, right? You can train, okay, the way I'm thinking is, purely instinctual and relational. I'm not thinking creatively. I'm not putting myself out there and trying to understand things that aren't there. And so you can train that to think creatively, and vice versa. You might be doing the same thing with deep thinking. Like I said, deep thinking is something that's trainable and something that personally, I think everyone should try and do. Everyone should try and understand a little bit about themselves, about the world around them, right? Instead of just, assuming and, this is probably how it works, whatever, and just moving on, right? And so I'm hoping that, with kind of this knowledge and, I'll kind of work on it. I'll see if there's a better way and an easier way to kind of disperse this information. But I'm hoping, while everyone's going through life, they can think like, hey, am I actively thinking? Is it just instinctual? Am I just thinking to think? Or am I trying to understand why I'm thinking these things, where my biases apply, right? And that's what's so wonderful about when you get to the point of deep thinking, so you can start removing those biases, right? Like, everyone has biases, right? Like I said, humans are kind of pattern recognition machines, right? Something happens, so this will happen, relational thinking, as a lot of animals and everything have, it's just in a line, right? But then, as a human with that deep thinking, you could remove that. Well, that doesn't always happen. Why did that happen, right? Why is it that when, I missed the stair, I fell down and broke 3 of my, bones or whatever? And trying to understand, like, okay, well, it was actually because I was messing around and I was, wasn't paying attention. I was on my phone, all this kind of, and you can truly try and understand yourself and not just assume, oh, it's because these stairs were made wrong or something like that, right? That's just an instinctive thought, or that's a creative thought you just assumed, right? Or a relational thought, right? Where it's, that's happened before in the past, so maybe that's what happened to me. But being able to truly deeply think is you can remove those biases. You can try and understand yourself, the world around you in just a deeper, more understanding way. And then on top of that, I'm hoping this helps people, be more honest, sure, but also be more understanding of the people around them, right? Sometimes people just think and just act on it, right? And yes, that's their fault, but we at the same time don't have to reciprocate that, right? We don't have to immediately, instinctively think something and act on that as well. We can understand, hey, people make mistakes. They probably weren't thinking super deeply about this specific action, and it was just the first thought that came to mind. And you don't have, like I said, you don't have to copy that type of action. And like I said, a lot of this is kind of in the works. I've been thinking about it for a while, but I'm very new to just the world, right? Very new to life. And I love learning. I love this idea of understanding, better things. And this is, like I said, this is something that I've seen and I've noticed in myself and with a few of the people I've talked to. But if you see it differently, if I'm missing one, or if maybe, like I said, the whole creative one could maybe be taken out. And there could just be, the 3, which I have heard before. There's I don't remember it off the top of my head, but it starts with like analyzing and then moving down like that. And maybe that is just the best way to do it. Maybe this creative one, that to me makes sense, because I feel like I do it a lot with my writing, right? When I'm writing, I'm not always relating it to other stuff, and it's not always instinctual, but I wouldn't consider it deep thinking. I'm not like really like just sitting there contemplating. I just come up with ideas and then I write those ideas. And so for me, the 4th one, the creative one, kind of makes sense. But again, I would love your guys' opinion, love your guys' thoughts. I know this is a very long video, so I'll probably try and break it up at some point, but I'm going to post the whole long video on YouTube. And then, like I said, I'd love to hear you guys' thoughts. Thank you guys so much for sitting through this with me, and hope you all have a wonderful day.